The question suddenly and unavoidably hangs in the air. Has Prince Harry, with a single political statement, crossed a diplomatic line that is taboo even for renegade royals? What initially seemed like just another provocative statement quickly escalated into a crisis that extends far beyond familial tensions. In London, Washington, and the world's media centers, there is now talk of a full-blown crisis, triggered by a man who officially holds no political office but bears a world-renowned name. Prince Harry found himself at the center of the controversy after publicly addressing security policy issues directly linked to NATO's veterans policy and the future direction of the United States. The tone, the choice of words, and above all, the timing raised alarm. Observers are calling it an unprecedented event. A member of the British royal family, albeit living in exile, is effectively positioning himself against a prominent U.S. critic, thereby interfering in a highly sensitive political arena. In the United Kingdom, the reaction is unequivocal. For generations, the ironclad rule of political neutrality has been a cornerstone of the monarchy. Queen Elizabeth II strictly adhered to this principle for decades, thereby securing the crown's non-partisan authority. That Prince Harry is now undermining this very foundation is being viewed behind the walls of Buckingham Palace as a strategic nightmare. The accusation is nothing less than diplomatic sabotage. The international context is particularly explosive. In the United States, the political climate is highly tense, and every statement with foreign policy implications is scrutinized. The fact that Prince Harry indirectly brings his title, his past as a British officer, and his affinity for military matters into play further exacerbates the situation. Critics see this not as activism, but as a dangerous conflation of celebrity, aristocracy, and power politics. According to palace sources, Prince William reacted with particular alarm. For him, it's not about personal vanity, but about institutional damage. In internal assessments, Harry is no longer viewed as a family member with freedom of expression, but as an incalculable risk factor. Every further public appearance, every further statement could further destabilize the already fragile balance between London and Washington. King Charles, meanwhile, is under immense pressure. On the one hand, the role of father weighs heavily on him, on the other, the responsibility as head of state. Observers interpret the king's silence in various ways, as tactical restraint, as powerlessness, or as a tacit admission that he has long since lost control over Prince Harry. What is clear, however, is that any delay will only escalate the situation further. At the same time, public criticism is growing. The media are increasingly commenting sharply that Prince Harry is apparently using the special status of a royal to deliver political messages without having to face the consequences that would apply to ordinary citizens. This is precisely the crux of the outrage. Neutrality is not an option, but a duty, and its breach inevitably has consequences. In diplomatic circles, there is now open discussion about whether this incident could be considered a turning point in the history of the modern monarchy. The idea that a single family member, through unilateral action, is jeopardizing relationships built up over decades is causing unease. The conflicts, previously fought internally, are increasingly spilling into the public eye. Ultimately, an uncomfortable realization emerges. Prince Harry's actions have unleashed a dynamic beyond his control. What began as a supposedly moral statement is now being seen as a strategic blunder with potentially long-lasting repercussions. The monarchy faces a crucial decision that can no longer be postponed. Is this the moment when personal freedom and institutional responsibility finally collide? And how long can the royal family afford to maintain distance and silence before the damage becomes irreversible? Behind the public outcry over Prince Harry's political pronouncements, another question now comes into focus. Who actually wrote this text? The more closely observers analyze the wording, the clearer it becomes that the tone and structure hardly fit the man who, in the past, has been known for his impulsive interviews and personal confessions. Instead of emotional outbursts, technocratic terms, strategic formulations, and a vocabulary more commonly associated with political communications departments than with the entourage of a renegade royal dominate. In media and PR circles, evidence is mounting of a professional network operating behind the scenes. The name Sunshine Sachs is mentioned particularly frequently. The agency is not considered typical celebrity PR, but rather a politically astute player with long-standing connections to influential circles in the United States. Critics view Prince Harry's public pronouncements on security issues, while such a structure guides his public communication, as a dangerous conflation of interests. The concern is directed less at individual statements than at the overall picture. A member of the British royal family who uses his reputation and title while having content supplied by politically experienced advisors crosses an invisible but crucial line. The impression arises of an unofficial diplomatic actor without a mandate, without democratic legitimacy, and without institutional oversight. It is precisely this impression that is alarming decision-makers on both sides of the Atlantic. Within the monarchy, political neutrality is considered not only a tradition but also a protective mechanism. It prevents the crown from becoming a pawn in partisan politics. Queen Elizabeth II consistently defended this principle for decades, refraining from taking any public stance, even in times of crisis. Prince Harry's current actions are therefore perceived not as an individual lapse but as a systemic risk. The question of instrumentalization is particularly sensitive. Critics argue that Prince Harry is acting less as an independent actor and is increasingly being used as a mouthpiece. His past as a soldier, his status as a royal, and his popularity in certain circles lend his statements a weight that traditional activists cannot achieve. This is precisely where the strategic value and the danger lie. Prince William is said to have recognized this development early on. From his perspective, not only is the family's reputation being damaged, but the monarchy itself is being drawn into political conflicts that it cannot control. Internal assessments suggest that Prince Harry fundamentally misunderstands his role. He acts as if he is entitled to a political platform, while in fact he holds neither office nor responsibility. Unease is also growing in the United States. Political messages emanating from the circle of a foreign royal family act like accelerants in a heated election campaign. The fact that these messages may have been formulated by professional strategists reinforces the impression of targeted influence. Even if there is no formal violation of the law, a moral and diplomatic dilemma arises. King Charles is thus confronted with an uncomfortable reality. Every day that Prince Harry acts without clearly defining his position fuels the suspicion of tacit acceptance. The palace's silence is increasingly interpreted as weakness, while the expectation for a clear stance grows. Observers are already speaking of a creeping loss of authority. By the end of this section, a disturbing picture is emerging. Prince Harry no longer appears as an independent rebel, but as part of a larger communications apparatus whose goals do not necessarily align with those of the monarchy. The question is no longer whether this development is problematic, but how long it can remain controllable. Is Prince Harry being deliberately manipulated, or is he engaging out of conviction in a game whose rules he does not fully understand? And what happens when political strategies and royal symbolism become inextricably intertwined? As the political dimension of the scandal continues to escalate, an issue is now coming to the fore that could have existential consequences for Prince Harry. His residency status in the United States. What was previously considered a peripheral issue is increasingly developing into a legal minefield. In Washington, the discussion is no longer just about words and their impact, but about files, applications, and legal consequences that cannot be glossed over with public outrage. Prince Harry lives in the U.S. not as a citizen, but as a guest. This status alone lends a new urgency to the debate. In political and legal circles, it is pointed out that any form of public influence on security or foreign policy issues is particularly sensitive when it comes from a person without voting rights but with enormous public reach. The latest move has touched precisely this vulnerability. The situation is further complicated by Prince Harry's own previous public statements. In his book Spare, he openly described his use of illegal substances. In the United States, this kind of confession is not merely a personal detail, but potentially a legally significant issue. Under U.S. immigration law, statements about drug use can directly impact visa decisions, especially when there are discrepancies between public statements and official applications. This creates a situation that legal experts describe as a classic dilemma. If Prince Harry provided accurate information on his visa application, the question inevitably arises as to the basis on which his residency was granted. Special provisions exist, but they are politically sensitive and subject to review at any time. If, on the other hand, he provided false information, this would open up a completely different but equally serious scenario. In conservative circles in the United States, pressure is mounting to uncover precisely these questions. The Heritage Foundation is pursuing legal action to compel access to relevant documents. The matter is no longer considered a celebrity affair, but a precedent-setting case. The central question is, do the same rules apply to a British prince as to any other immigrant? Donald Trump has already publicly fueled this debate. His statements are being interpreted in political analyses as a clear warning. The suggestion that Prince Harry should not be protected if necessary has attracted attention in Washington. Against the backdrop of a possible political shift in power, this statement acts like a sword of Damocles hanging over Harry's life in the U.S. Another scenario is causing unease: the speculation about a possible special status. Should Prince Harry have entered the U.S. with a special visa category, political activities would be even more problematic. Such visas are strictly tied to neutrality. Any public interference in domestic political debates could be considered a violation of fundamental conditions with immediate consequences. Prince William is said to be very aware of this danger. From his perspective, not only his brother's personal fate is at stake, but also the international credibility of the monarchy. A possible revocation of his residency permit would make headlines worldwide and further cement the image of an uncontrollable royal. For William, this is not a theoretical risk, but a realistic scenario. King Charles is in an increasingly difficult position. Intervention could be interpreted as an attempt at political influence, silence as indifference. The legal machinery in the United States, however, follows its own rules, regardless of family ties or historical symbols. Ultimately, the situation coalesces into an alarming picture. Prince Harry is not only at the center of a media storm but also teetering on the brink of a legal abyss. Every further step, every further public statement could tip the fragile balance. Will the visa become the lever used to enforce political consequences? And will Prince Harry realize in time that words in this environment can cost more than just headlines? Parallel to the political and legal escalation, another fracture is revealed. This time in the world that was supposed to guarantee Prince Harry and Meghan Markle financial stability and social relevance. Hollywood, long portrayed as a refuge and stage for a fresh start, is suddenly showing a marked cooling. What was planned as a glamorous appearance has turned into a visible setback with symbolic power. At the heart of it all is the appearance at the Sundance Film Festival. Expectations were high. The images were meant to convey strength, influence, and creative independence. But reports from the event paint a different picture. Instead of enthusiasm, empty seats, subdued reactions, and a noticeable reticence from the industry dominated. In an industry that measures success, such signals are considered unambiguous. The fact that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle didn't appear as independent newcomers, but as the faces of a multi-million-dollar media project, carries particular weight. Netflix had paved their way into the entertainment industry with a comprehensive contract. That a project still relies on festivals is seen in industry circles as a tacit admission. The original partner has apparently distanced itself. In Hollywood, this is considered a warning sign that quickly spreads. The discrepancy between public self-presentation and industrial reality is increasingly being discussed. While political statements generate worldwide attention, commercial success remains elusive. Producers and agents closely monitor whether projects deliver substance or merely names. In this case, a prominent background no longer seems sufficient to guarantee interest. This development is particularly delicate for Prince Harry. His public influence stems not only from his lineage but also from his reach. However, if this reach is no longer translated into economic relevance, it loses its value. Hollywood reacts pragmatically, not emotionally. Attention without return is seen as a risk, not an opportunity. The on-site staging also caused irritation. Observers described an appearance that resembled justification rather than triumph. Instead of a confident presentation, explanations and symbolic gestures dominated, reinforcing the impression that control and narratives are becoming increasingly fragile. In an industry that expects strength, uncertainty is off-putting. This development coincides with the political escalation, a circumstance that is viewed internally as problematic. Anyone simultaneously under legal pressure, politically polarizing, and struggling commercially sends a signal of instability. Investors and partners avoid precisely this constellation. The name alone no longer opens doors when the overall picture appears contradictory. Prince William is said to be paying close attention to these signals. From his perspective, a pattern is emerging. The more Prince Harry tries to generate significance, the more clearly the cracks become apparent. The vision of a successful, independent media empire is losing credibility, while the price of public appearances is rising. For the monarchy, this means additional damage, as business failure inevitably reflects badly on the institution. King Charles, in turn, faces a dilemma. Another public failure by his son widens the gap between aspiration and reality. At the same time, the pressure is mounting to draw clear lines to avoid the appearance of permanent complicity. Hollywood thus becomes a mirror reflecting a deeper crisis. By the end of this section, it is clear that the entertainment industry's rejection is not an isolated event, but part of a larger downward spiral. Political provocation, legal uncertainty, and economic disillusionment reinforce each other. The stage is shrinking while the risks are growing. Is Hollywood, then, the first major power to visibly turn away? And what does it mean for Prince Harry when even there, no safe haven remains, while public pressure continues to mount? With each public appearance, the focus increasingly shifts from political and business matters to a personal dynamic that is being viewed with growing criticism by the public. Observers are no longer simply talking about misjudgments, but about the control of power and a role model that is pushing Prince Harry into an increasingly passive position. What was once presented as a modern, egalitarian approach is now interpreted as a one-sided power dynamic. This perception was particularly evident at recent public events. Images and videos were intensively analyzed in social media and commentary. Gestures, positioning, and the sequence of appearances struck many as not accidental, but choreographed. Prince Harry often appeared as a supporting figure, while Meghan Markle dominated the stage. For critics, this is not a detail, but a symbol of the loss of independence. In the public eye, Prince Harry is no longer the former officer or headstrong royal, but an actor whose actions are closely linked to his wife's strategy. This interpretation is reinforced by the fact that political statements, media projects, and public appearances often appear to be coordinated in terms of timing and content. The impression is growing that decisions are less spontaneous and more planned. This development has consequences for credibility. A man who criticizes presidents and comments on international security issues is simultaneously perceived as someone who has little room to maneuver in his personal life. This discrepancy undermines the authority of his statements. Critics ask how someone can demand global responsibility when he appears publicly controlled or manipulated. This dynamic is also being closely watched in Great Britain. In palace circles, Prince Harry's public image is increasingly seen as problematic, not for moral reasons but for strategic ones. The monarchy thrives on clear role models of stability and predictability. A royal who is perceived in the public eye as insecure or dependent weakens these cornerstones. Prince William is said to view this development particularly critically. From his perspective, it's not about personal sympathies, but about the institution's public image. Every scene, every photograph, every headline reinforces a narrative that is almost impossible to correct. Prince Harry no longer appears as an independent actor, but as part of a staged performance whose objective remains unclear. Meghan Markle, on the other hand, is at the center of this perception. Her public presence, her controlled handling of the media, and her ability to shape narratives are interpreted by supporters as strengths and by critics as dominance. Regardless of the assessment, one thing is certain. Attention is increasingly focused on her, while Prince Harry is losing his distinctiveness. This shift also affects the political debate. Anyone who criticizes Prince Harry is indirectly attacking the entourage that visibly accompanies him. This complicates any reaction from the palace. Intervention could be interpreted as an attack on Meghan Markle, silence as tacit approval. The room for maneuver is shrinking. At the same time, the public is increasingly feeling that authenticity has given way to a staged performance. Appearances seem rehearsed, reactions calculated, emotions controlled. In a time when credibility is a scarce commodity, this can become a decisive disadvantage. Trust is not eroded by a scandal, but by the repetition of the same pattern. At the end of this section, a central theme takes shape. Prince Harry seems to have increasingly lost control of his own narrative. Whether this is intentional or not remains unclear. But perception shapes reality, and this reality is as dangerous for the monarchy as it is for him. Is Prince Harry still an actor in his own life, or merely part of a larger production? And how long can such a power structure persist before it is finally challenged publicly? As political, legal, and media fronts harden, the conflict is shifting definitively to the heart of the monarchy. Behind closed doors, a power struggle is said to be intensifying, one that is no longer merely familial but institutional. Observers speak of an open test of the tension between responsibility and leniency, between securing the future and emotional attachment. At the center of this conflict are Prince William and King Charles, with fundamentally different ideas about how to deal with Prince Harry. For Prince William, the situation is clear. Every further escalation, every new headline, and every diplomatic misstep increases the damage. In his view, Prince Harry has crossed the final line by mixing international politics with his personal agenda. The argument goes that the institution should no longer bear the price. Internal voices are calling for a radical solution, a clear separation, the revocation of remaining privileges, and a definitive demarcation. King Charles, however, is said to be hesitant. As monarch, he is obligated to neutrality. As a father, he is inclined to be considerate. This tension paralyzes decision-making. Critics accuse him of pursuing de-escalation for too long while the situation objectively escalates. Every delay reinforces the impression of indecisiveness and allows Prince Harry to continue acting as if there were no consequences. The danger lies less in the individual case than in the signal it sends. Should the impression arise that a member of the royal family can trigger international controversies without any reaction, the credibility of the entire institution suffers. For Prince William, this is the crucial point. He thinks in terms of stability, not emotional considerations. His focus is on the future of the monarchy and the internal risks. A strategic calculation also plays a role. Should Prince Harry face legal pressure in the United States, a return to Great Britain would be conceivable. Internally, this very scenario is considered a nightmare. A politically charged, media-polarizing royal on British soil would multiply conflicts and once again thrust the monarchy into the center of global debates. For Prince William, prevention is therefore imperative. King Charles faces a historic decision. If he opts for reconciliation, he risks further loss of authority. If he opts for decisive action, he risks a complete break. The implications extend beyond personal relationships. It concerns whether the monarchy is perceived as an institution capable of learning or as a structure that undermines its own principles out of loyalty to the family. This tension is increasingly perceived by the public. Commentators speak of a turning point at which the monarchy is forced to take a stand. Silence is no longer interpreted as dignity, but as insecurity. The expectation is growing that responsibility will be visibly assumed, even if the price is high. At the end of this section, a bleak picture emerges. Prince Harry has not only ignited external conflicts but also deepened internal divisions. His actions are acting as a catalyst for long-simmering tensions. The institution faces a crucial decision that can no longer be postponed. Will the monarchy summon the courage to draw clear lines? Or will it, out of familial considerations, take a risk that undermines its long-term stability. The events of the past few weeks paint a picture of a multi-layered escalation. Prince Harry's politically charged statements have triggered a chain reaction that extends far beyond mere personal opinion. International diplomacy, legal uncertainty in the United States, economic disillusionment in Hollywood, and a visible shift in public role models are converging into a crisis that can hardly be viewed in isolation. At its core lies the breach of a central principle of the monarchy: neutrality. What served as a shield for decades has been damaged by unilateral action. The consequences not only affect Prince Harry himself but cast a shadow over the entire royal family. Prince William is responding with strategic resolve, while King Charles is displaying emotional restraint. A contradiction that exacerbates the internal conflict. At the same time, it's becoming clear that public influence without institutional support quickly becomes a burden. Political statements generate attention, but also resistance. Economic projects lose their appeal when trust erodes, and personal posturing is no substitute for stability when credibility is at stake. The situation is open but not without consequences. Every further delay increases the price of the inevitable decision. Whether the monarchy draws clear conclusions or opts for compromise will shape its future. One thing is certain: the time of ambivalence is running out. Prince Harry is at the end of a path he himself accelerated, and will the monarchy learn the lessons from this crisis before external forces dictate the decision?